Hello and welcome back to the final part in this video series. For those who missed parts 1 and 2, the goal here is to time how quickly I can finish a Tamiya King Tiger model built by my friend Herbie. So far we've spent roughly 3 hours to get the 1/35th scale Tiger II to this state of painting. We finished off last time with the tracks and gave both them and the onboard tools a rusty appearance. This was followed with these dark washes from Ammo by MIG, making sure that the dark colour settled in all the recesses of the tracks. This would provide a valuable shadow effect. Sorry it's taken so long to get part 3 out, and that the channel has been quite quiet lately. I'll make a channel update soon which will explain why I haven't been as productive as usual. Anyway, on with the matter in hand. In this video you'll once more see how the project developed and how long each subsequent stage took, as we rush to finish the paint job. I continued to work on the running gear and next focused on the wheels. To give them a muddy and dusty appearance, I used a technique that is quite effective and pretty easy to achieve. I used some Ammo Mud Effects washes, specifically the references seen on screen, to create the mud tones, but the secret is to mix them with some pumice. Pumice is a very fine dusty powder and it is perfect for replicating a grainy mud wash. You can get it easily enough on eBay. Just add it to your enamel wash, dilute it to varying degrees and apply liberally to the model's wheels, just as you might a traditional wash. The solvent will evaporate and leave a dusty build-up of coloured wash and dried pumice, depicting caked on mud in the running gear. Here are some shots of the finished effect. You can repeat the procedure on the rusty tracks in various applications to ensure the mud and debris is matched and unified. The minutes are ticking away as another key and somewhat familiar modelling technique is used. Chipping is a well-known way to show chipped and damaged paint, and there are a number of ways to achieve it, some of which will be seen here. I started off conventionally, using a fine brush and lightened versions of the base tone. That will portray freshly chipped or damaged layers of top coat, or scratches in that paint. You can also see how I used the shade to pick out certain surface details like bolts or hinges. This is serving a slightly different function to the paint chips, adding depth and perspective to the model, but it makes sense to do it at the same time. Just work your way around the model's edges and key features. I started off with this Dunkelgelb reference, which you can see is noticeably lighter than the base. Before Herbie gave it a go with a lightened version of the olive grün colour. Then we moved to the light rot brown chipping, but as you can see, for these I used some foam in a set of tweezers and carefully dipped it onto the model. This is called the sponge chipping technique. Don't overload the sponge with paint and really take care, working slowly and delicately in small areas at a time. You can follow up with a dark brown, which is basically the unpainted steel or rusty metal exposed when the top coats are so damaged as to reveal the oxidized metal below. This will be especially heavy around the engine deck and around items like tow hooks, lifting eyes or extremities of the vehicle. Here's how the model looks at this stage, as well as the time taken to get here. All these stages are fairly conventional, and after chipping it's often the case that everything looks too fresh or artificial wherever the chipping is seen. Essentially, it's too neat and clean and needs to be toned down. It's time for a filter, and in this case I'm using a MIG Productions one for this type of paint scheme. A filter is a very thin coat. The thinner the better. Its purpose is to subtly change the chroma or colour hue of the underlying paint. It's not like a wash, which is heavy. This should be light and subtle. It should leave no residue, only a subtly changed colour. Here you can see Herbie applying this filter gently over the entire model, but especially where chipping occurred. You can do this with different colours too. The first reference was designed for tritonal camo, but you could use a German grey or bluish filter on other parts that warrant it, like the barrel. In that case, it unifies the base and highlight shades of German grey used on the gun barrel. The next stage is again well known, and it's a dark wash. I used a product from Ammo, and a dark wash is applied to all the shadows and recesses. The downside, as you will see, is it can darken the model considerably. It can also make any paint effects like modulation or pre-shading disappear. I applied a heavy wash in the interests of saving time. It is admittedly an effect that isn't to everyone's liking, but it can always be toned down later on, as you'll see. I don't always go this heavy, but in this case needs must. Using a good quality brush, guide the wash into panel lines, joins and recesses, and around bolt heads and rivets, using capillary action to pull it along. You could also wet the entire model down with thinners beforehand to help the wash flow smoothly. The good news with an enamel wash like this is that it's fairly easy to remove or thin it down later. It's also easy to blend or remove any excess or tide marks with a thick, flat, wide brush moistened with thinners. Whilst that dried, we went back over the tracks with more Ammo mud wash and pumice, so they better matched the road wheels. The technique was exactly the same as before, but with much more pumice added and a slightly different blend of colours to create variety. As you can see, by the end of the process, the tracks are way more muddy and realistic, without the detail of these stock rubber tracks being completely destroyed. We then applied the pumice mud mix to the main model, being careful to use smaller amounts and pull it downwards to create realistic streaks. In these shots, the effect is especially visible. Here are some turntable shots showing how the model looks at this stage, but there's still plenty more to do. I decided to add wet mud detail to the wheels using a dark mud mix around the bolts and hubs, and anywhere where wetter mud or moisture would collect. This used a dark mud tone from Ammo, darkened with Tamiya black enamel. Once dry, it leaves that contrasting two-tone mud effect seen with fresh mud over old layers of mud. It was time next to hint at the cement-like consistency of the Zimmerit and show areas of dust, damage and degradation using grey. This is applied a bit like chipping around damaged areas of Zimmerit coating. I then loaded up the airbrush with the mud tones used beforehand on the running gear. This was sprayed on both as a thin coat, but it was also stippled on by turning the airbrush right down to get specks of paint. Keep it all thin and subtle, but build up a fine coating of mud and dust. Note how it flattens everything down and blends it all. Here you can see me darkening the mix to get greater contrast in fresh mud tones. The rule here is to go quite a bit darker than seems right, as the mud will usually lighten as it dries, leaving you with a pleasant contrast and humid patches, replicating wet mud. To represent the running surfaces of the road wheel, the steel was recreated using metal coat by HUMBROL, which is a buffable enamel paint. Simply apply with a cotton bud. The effect was heightened with metallic pigment from LIFECOLOR and a blending pencil. Just rub it onto the surface for a pleasing gleam like polished steel. To add some dust deposits, an ammo reference was mixed with Tamiya XF57 buff enamel. This was applied as small puddles and pools of dust using a pumice wash. The dust deposits could be blended using a wide flat brush. I also took the dust deposits and drew them downwards to create dust streaks and rain marks. The colour can also be sprayed in fine coats to create dust. This serves an important function to tone down the black washes of the prior stages. Here too, stippling can be used along the shadow and feature lines to tone and blend everything down. So basically, if you go along where we did the black shading and do this, all that hard black shading is then kind of more sort of acceptable, you know? You can actually just spray along it like this. Now bear in mind this is spirits based, so we can remove any dots we don't like, what have you, blend everything. That'll do me just fine. After a few tweaks and adding the road wheels, a dark mud and oil mixture was made up using dark wash from Ammo and murky water from Wilder. The mix is applied around the hubs and on the engine deck to look like oil spots. After a light coat of sandy colour, it was time to attach the rubber kit tracks. As speed was the name of the game, we went with those, and given they are largely hidden, they were fine. We just had to staple them to give them a bit of extra strength, but they look alright. Yeah? It's never there. Okay, well we're going to show it in all its horror, because that's always useful. I decided to do some dry brushing using this LIFECOLOR shade. Dry brushing is simple and easy to do. Just remove as much paint as you can from the brush on a piece of paper towel and gently skim it over all the raised details to leave a fine coating of the dark brown. This represents damaged and worn paint. On to the final weathering stages. Onboard equipment was attached and I moved swiftly onto Abteilung 502 oils. Mixing up my own dark wash, I used it to tone down the tools and accessories or apply shadows around their fixing points. you can seal everything with flat varnish before doing the final detailing of chips, wear and any repairs that are needed. Finally, you can add mud or dust deposits with pigments. And we're done. It's taken about 6 3/4 hours to get this far. Working at a fairly breakneck pace, much faster than I usually would, I won't lie, it was pretty stressful as a result. However, I learnt a lot doing it, and it taught me a lot about working quickly and interchanging between acrylics and enamels. Herbie asked me to retouch his figure, which I did. And we were done. So here we have it, a quick fire King Tiger completed as quickly as I could with a bit of help from Herbie. I hope you enjoyed the film. The model has now gone back to my friend and he is pleased with it. If you liked our work, leave a comment or a thumbs up, or how about subscribing to the channel? It really helps. Bye for now.
Subscribe for our latest videos.